Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe, if you're calling from Europe or Africa or elsewhere. Welcome everyone. If you are, we're gonna give a few minutes for folks to arrive. We have record registration numbers where we've got over 400 people registered. Not expecting everyone to be with us, but hopefully most of those folks. So we're just gonna allow a little bit more time for our colleagues to arrive. And if you are just joining us, feel free to chat in the chat box where you're calling in from. I'm Shadi Salehi. I'm the director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, calling from the land of the Ohlone people, currently known as San Francisco. And please introduce yourselves in the chat box, and we will get started in just a couple minutes. And just a reminder, housekeeping, if you are not speaking, please make sure you are on mute. And I think most of us at this point know the drill with Zoom, but please use the chat as much as possible for questions, comments, insights. And lovely to see everyone's introductions. So if you are just joining us, please introduce yourself, your organization, where you're calling in from, and we will get started shortly. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello, everybody. So nice to see your faces. Again, my name is Shadi Salehi. I am the director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. Hosting this session in partnership with our fabulous community of partners, Northern California grantmakers, Southern California grantmakers, Catalyst of San Diego, and GEO. Takes a real village to put on this kind of series. This is the final session of our Ethos of Being Trust-Based series. And I see so many familiar names and faces. So I know many of you have stuck with us throughout this whole series. So thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause, please. And welcome. I am so happy to be with you today. So excited about today's discussion. But before we get into it and start thinking and having the discussions and all this stuff, let's take a moment just to arrive and settle and get grounded. If it feels comfortable for you, you can put your feet flat on the ground if you can. And if it's comfortable, you can go ahead and close your eyes. And just take a series of deep breaths. So just slowly inhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 2 more times. Inhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One more time. Inhale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold it at the top. Take one more sip of air. And then just exhale and let it all out. And shake it out. Thank you. Thank you for joining in that. I hope you all are doing all right, hanging in there. Just, we're still dealing with lots of craziness, challenges, insanity, homeschool, everything. So thank you for being with us today for this discussion. As I mentioned, this is the final of the series that we have been doing called The Ethos of Being Trust-Based. And this series has been an offering to invite us all to really reflect on what it means to be a trust-based funder and partner in a trust-based ecosystem. So for those of you who are familiar with trust-based philanthropy and have heard about it, it's really an approach rooted in power awareness and recognizing our roles as funders in intentionally working to alleviate those power imbalances. And that applies to interpersonal interactions, interorganizational interactions, and systemic work that we do and support. So in terms of the practices of trust-based philanthropy, the practical embodiments of that are giving multi-year unrestricted funding, doing the homework on prospective grantees, just simplifying and streamlining paperwork, being transparent and responsive, soliciting and acting on feedback, and offering support beyond the check. Those are the 6 grant-making practices of being a trust-based funder. But there's deeper elements of this practice that are about the values and the culture of what it means to be trust-based. And so this series that we named the Ethos of being trust-based has been all about exploring what does that really mean to embody that ethos? What does it look like to show up in a trust-based way? And how can we incorporate self-reflection and a historical analysis to recognize how power shows up in our work, in our day-to-day interactions, and within our relationships with grantee partners? And what can we do practically as funders to be better partners in the spirit of alleviating these very deeply rooted power imbalances that exist? We've had a very spirited series of discussions over the past 6 months on these topics. Our most recent one was focused on confronting and correcting historical power imbalances, where we really dug into the history of what has given way to philanthropy, the history of extractive labor that has given way to wealth accumulation, and how the lingering effects of all of that continues to live within our sector, which has traditionally reinforced a very compliance-oriented, top-down culture. So for all of you here, and we'll be hearing from our speakers today, how can we make it our jobs to recognize that and do something about it? And there are ways we can chip away at this. It is deeply ingrained, but if we collectively embrace some of these ideas and work to bring along our colleagues, then we can actually do some really good work to alleviate some of these deeply ingrained challenges. So today, we're gonna get practical and we're gonna explore. So we're basically pulling together all of the things we've talked about throughout the course of this series. And even if you're just joining us today for the first time, welcome. We'll be touching upon a lot of what we've already discussed, but really getting practical about what does it mean to reimagine our roles as funders in a trust-based context. How can we name how power has shown up? And how can we recognize how we've perpetuated bad power dynamics? And how can we see it in the most practical stuff, like in job descriptions, in theories of change, in ways that we have kind of systematized the practice that we bring, that we offer? How can we re-examine some of that? Let's check some of our assumptions. So I am thrilled to introduce our fabulous panel of speakers to share their insights on this. And I'm gonna just go ahead and introduce each one, and we'll welcome you to introduce yourselves to the group and your role and what you want to kind of bring to the discussion today. And so let's start with Dimple Abichandani, Executive Director of the General Service Foundation. Welcome, Dimple.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm thrilled that we're holding this topic, and I think getting at kind of the compliance culture and sort of what are the things in our institutions that actually hold us back from being able to really step into these trust-based practices is an important conversation we need to have.
Thank you. Welcome, Dimple. Next, I'm just going it by an ABC order by last name. So next we have Gabriella Alcalde, who is the Executive Director of the Sewell Foundation. Welcome, Gabriella.
Thank you, Shadi. Thank you all for being here for this important conversation. Really excited to be with my peer panelists and all of you. I think this is essential to the changes that I think philanthropy often talks about wanting to see externally, and we have to do it inside first. We have to do the work ourselves if we're going to actually push any of this outside into the external world.
Thank you, Gabriella. And next we have Lisa Cowan, who is Vice President at the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation. Welcome, Lisa.
Shadi. I was just thinking about how much more nervous I would be if I was with 400 people. Well, what do we have? 173 people in a room. I don't feel that nervous now, but I did put on lipstick, so you guys would think I was smart. And I think that is very connected to sort of how program officers often show up and what they wear and what we name. So this is also PS, the lipstick I wore at my wedding, which was 20 years ago. Just to give you a sense of how often I pull that out.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you for putting on lipstick today. And last but not least, Carmen Rojas, the President and CEO of the Marguerite Casey Foundation. Welcome, Carmen.
Hi, Shadi. Thank you so much for this invitation. And I'm really sort of grappling with sort of the key ideas that many people are grappling with, which are like, how do we actually move away from centering philanthropy as the power and actually become the means by which the communities, families, people we care about and talk about so much become powerful. And so I'm glad to be here. Glad Lisa wore lipstick. I also wore lipstick, and I'm wearing sneakers, so like I'm evening it out, and mostly happy to have the opportunity to talk about a recent job that we put up and the excitement around it.
Thank you, Carmen. And thank you all of our speakers for modeling this, like, let's show up as our whole human selves. And thank you. I washed my hair this morning, actually. So that was my contribution to the discussion. Well, let's get into it. You know, I want to start out with you, Dimple, because you often speak about this fact that we've instituted a compliance culture in traditional philanthropy. And can you share more, Dimple, about what you mean by this compliance culture, and how does power imbalance show up within that?
Sure. Well, so what I mean by compliance culture is, first, you know, all of our institutions as foundations basically have some sort of origin story, right? So we all have a pot of resources, and these resources came from someplace. And oftentimes what you see is sort of with the resources came a certain type of culture. And those cultures tend to be either corporate cultures or legal cultures, or often financial cultures, right? And there's a whole set of behaviors and rules that go with that. And we often come in, oftentimes, like, the kinds of people who work in foundations are people who are looking to sort of solve societal problems. They're looking to make a difference in their communities. And they come into these institutions maybe not aware initially of the fact that there are these cultures that are operating. And so I always encourage people to really be on a lookout for those, because that ends up being the stumbling block to making process changes, right? So I'll share a couple of examples of when I came to GSF, like the places that I saw compliance culture. I'll share two examples. So one is we used to have a lot of project grants and one-year grants. And to understand why a project grant is compliance culture, just think about when you as an individual want to support an organization, right? Say that, like, someone's doing a fundraiser and they reach out to you and they say, can you support this work I'm doing? What are you going to do? You're going to pull out your checkbook if you still have a checkbook, or maybe you'll do Venmo or PayPal or whatever, but you will transfer money to them. You will not include a 6-page set of terms about what they can and can't do and what they have to do in return, right? Which is what most of our institutions have been taught we need to do. So, on the substance side of kind of how we were doing our funding, the project grants, the one-year grants, that to me, when I really dug into why were we doing that, it came out of a sense that these were philanthropic best practices, right? Like that this is how you do philanthropy. The other place that compliance culture really showed up was in the tone that we used, mostly on the operations and grants management side. And this really stuck out to me because one of the things that really drew me to General Service Foundation was that I had known the program team and had known them to be really relational. Like the culture on our board and in our staff was one of true partnership. And I knew that and I saw that. And then I would look at our letter that went out when someone got a grant, and I was so struck that somebody, or more often than not, it was several people, would have worked for 3 or 4 months trying to get this grant. And then they get this letter, and it's a combination of legalese, right? The grant contract that I was just mentioning, and a cover letter that basically reminds people of all the things that they owe us. Attached is your grant check. Your report is due on such and such date. If we do not receive the interim report, you will not receive the second check. And nowhere in this letter was that spirit that we have within our organization of, wow, we are so excited to be in partnership with you. We want your work to thrive. And this is just the beginning of how we want to be in partnership around that. So, the last thing I'll say is I think the places that I saw compliance culture, what was striking to me is that it was all in places where people were really doing their jobs as they understood their jobs, right? And Carmen's going to talk a little bit about how important it is for us to reimagine what these jobs are. But I think that the team that I came into had been going to peak grant making, had been, doing the webinars, had been reading the IRS updates. And so that's why I think it's really important that we name this idea that these are kind of cultures and practices that are handed down, and it's really time to question them and re-examine them because there isn't really a legal basis for them. And the true kind of underpinning of it has to do with a notion of power and control, and the idea that if I'm giving you something, I'm getting something in return. So I, as the funder, in return, get to oversee your work. I get to ask you a bunch of questions about it. You have to report to me. And by changing these processes and really making explicit and challenging those assumptions, that's how we actually start to move towards practices that are about partnership.
Thank you, Dimple. Thank you for helping us recognize that sometimes these bad practices that perpetuate a power imbalance are unintentional. It's just been kind of part of the status quo for a while, and we haven't taken a step back to pause and question it and rethink it. Gabriella, next I want to come to you because you have raised some really good points about the harm that this compliance culture has caused in the sector. What do you mean by that? And why is this power imbalance something we should care about in philanthropy?
Thanks, Shadi. First, I would just want to say I echo everything Dimple said. So yes, yes, yes to everything you said. I'm gonna approach this from a slightly different perspective to answer your question, since Dimple's already laid out such a good groundwork for this. I would say, one, we need to be aware of the difference between intent and impact. And I think that is sort of just equity 101. Just because you have good intentions does not mean that the impact is positive or good or not harmful. So philanthropy has caused a lot of harm, often unintentionally with good intentions, but it has. The reason, and I'm going to sort of share my own personal story of how I came into philanthropy for that, and why I think it's so important, and why I devote so much of my professional and personal energy to it. So my career has mostly been outside of philanthropy. I've been in philanthropy for 10 years now. My background's in public health, and let's see, 10 years ago, I had started and was running a grassroots organization. And we had a funder that we were working with. And as the ED, I would say I spent about 40% of my time protecting my staff, who are community organizers, from the funders and from the impact of the funders. Collaborated with a number of other grassroots organizations. Most of them were led by people of color, by immigrant groups. And I literally sat with the leaders of community organizations doing amazing transformative work in community, in solidarity, with them crying and saying, okay, I have a choice here of either lying on these forms that the funder wants, or risking losing the livelihoods of my staff and the services that we provide for our communities. So that's where I come to this. It's from a very visceral reaction to having seen the harm that is done intentionally and unintentionally. I had another situation in which, because the funder that we worked with required that they write on, that every recipient write that they received funding from them. A very small grassroots organization that worked for economic justice lost funding from a religiously affiliated funder when they saw the name of this other funder whom they knew funded reproductive justice. And it was one of those unexamined requirements. If we give you funding, you need to put our name on everything that you do. You need to announce that we have done this for you, because you need to be grateful. And I've seen that repeatedly. I've heard people say, I'm not sure if they deserve our money. It is not our money. So I think we need to start with that. It is not our money. Just because we work in philanthropy, it is not ours. It is our responsibility to make sure that we have an examined and accountable way of dispersing these resources. But there's no accountability built into philanthropy. So I think we have to do this work ourselves. We have to question these power structures. We have to question every form, every written statement, every practice, because culture, the thing about culture is it makes so many things invisible. These assumptions are just hidden into the way that we react. They seem like best practices often. People say this is the way it's always been done, or we've learned from the business sector how to do some work. We're not for profit. That is not. So using that same thinking and that same sort of flow of processes is going to get us somewhere very different, when the inputs and outputs that philanthropy should have are very different. And I would add one more thing, just from the perspective of being an immigrant. The reason that we need philanthropy so much in the United States is because government does not provide for a lot of the basic services, a lot of our safety net, the absolute essentials for people to live and survive. We're not talking about extras, just housing, health, education, food, things like that. So philanthropy is stepping in there. And so for me, the question is, what kind of relationship do we believe that communities and people should have with essential human services and human rights? And it seems to me that this position of power that philanthropy has been put in really continues to re-traumatize, particularly communities that have been excluded, exploited, extracted, left out of active participation in democracy.
Wow, thank you, Gabriella. Really, really poignant points. In a minute, we're going to do a little brief independent writing exercise, but I would like to bring in our other speakers to comment on this. Carmen, as a leader of a foundation that is dedicated to building power among families across the country, how do you think about this kind of power dynamic that shows up in the work. And what we will later on talk about the program officer, the Reimagine program officer role, but in a big picture, how do you think about how that power shows up in the grantee relationships?
Yeah, I think it shows up in a couple of places. And so like Gabriella, I feel like I am an interloper. So I'm 10 months into this job now. And, you know, through the grace of all kinds of amazing people like Dimple, who allowed me to be on General Service Foundation board, have had like different interactions with different types of philanthropic institutions. And the thing that was really clear to me is that like my sister Dimple has really been on the forefront, not only of calling out philanthropy, but calling in the possibility that we are in a once in a generation, possibly a once in a lifetime moment to actually transform our democracy and transform our economy. And we can only do that if we do the sort of necessary reckoning within philanthropy. I don't come from sort of the place of believing that we need philanthropy to provide these essential services. I think that we need to fund organizing to make sure that government provides these services to us. And so that's our commitment. So we fund grassroots organizing across the country that's really not only committed to shifting the balance of power, but that's shifting the balance of power to those folks who've long been excluded from it. And for me, coming into this role, it was, I feel like I had a crib sheet. You know, I will forever be grateful to Dimple for creating so much room for me to learn how you take apart, to really examine the practices, processes, procedures, the bureaucracy of philanthropy that centers us and decenters those folks, the leaders who are doing the work every day. And so what we've done as an institution in this short period of time is really like take what General Service Foundation has done and adopt it really quickly. In our first month, got rid of reporting, are getting rid of our application, have spoken to every single grant recipient, and it hasn't been a program officer conversation, it's been a VP of programs or me conversation, and are working to make visible both the promise of philanthropy and sort of like the natural tensions, right? So like, I know there's a deep desire to make philanthropy more democratic, and there is no more, there's no less democratic type of institution. So like there is the promise, working to make philanthropy more democratic feels like a fool's errand to me, but I do absolutely want to be transparent. I want people to know how much their money they're going to get, when they're going to get that money, what the jobs that we have, how much I get paid, both within the organization and in the field. I think that those are all sort of inputs so that people can decide whether or not we are the right organization for them to be in partnership with. Like I think we're at a moment where movements are starting to realize, and movement leaders are starting to realize, that through organizing in and of themselves, there's an opportunity to hold us more accountable and to have a sort of tighter looking glass into what our jobs are. And I want to make sure that we are, on the one side, organizing ourselves as leaders in philanthropy to be able to offer an alternative to what is a norm of practice. I think that, like, to be honest, like giving general operating support is the lowest bar. I'm like, that just seems like everybody should just do it. Like, I don't treating people as if they live with environmental crisis and not with white supremacy or police surveillance or any racialized capitalism, sort of parsing out the problems that people are confronting and hoping that through one problem will intervene and will make a big difference it's silly. And so but that is the lowest bar. I think that the systems that we've put in place, the people that we've hired into philanthropy, often sort of act, instead of the wind behind the sails of movement leaders, actually pull us back, sort of harden our role as wanting to be the center as opposed to centering the leaders who are most powerful. So we are like, it's an active, we're actively contending with what it means as an institution to move beyond sort of the basics and towards a commitment to a multiracial democracy and a truly, truly representative economy.
Wow, thank you, Carmen. It's really exciting to hear the changes that are already underway, and really helping people see that it's possible. You don't, you're never going to fully arrive. It is a constant process, but it is possible to make those changes. Lisa, I want to come next to you. You have kind of admitted to some level of discomfort with the funder role. And I'm sure you're not alone. I'm sure there's people on this call too. You can just wave your hand if you feel brave enough to say that. Lisa, can you share a little bit more about that? And it seems to be tied to some of these kind of dynamics that we're already talking about, but can you share a bit more about just how you have understood and kind of negotiated this relationship as funder?
Yeah. Well, I think that implicit within the sort of structure of philanthropy is this unspoken statement that rich people are smarter than poor people. And I don't believe that. And so it's hard for me to be part of a system that is so much built on that. So on the very simplest level, that is where my discomfort comes from. And then I think a lot of what we do, I mean, a lot of the way people do things because the people who had the jobs before them did it that way, who do it because the people who came before them did it that way. And there's been very little room to actually ask why. And a lot, when I came into my job, I was shocked to learn that really all we needed was a 990 and we had made up everything else. And so I feel uncomfortable with that too. And really, I mean, like sort of apropos of my lipstick comment, like I'm very familiar with what I don't know. And there's a lot of it. And so to show up with people who really know their work, and to be in some sort of position of judgment or of asking for compliance, as Dimple was saying, again, just feels very uncomfortable to me. And I think that there's a lot that can be done on an individual level and on an organizational level, and that it's much harder to sort of permeate the system. And I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what we're all here for. Thank you for those great opening remarks. I'd like to take a moment for a brief independent writing exercise. And I just chatted the question in the chat box. And if you want to turn off your screen for this portion, that's great. We'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to just reflect and write. Can you name specific ways your foundation or others or past organizations you've worked for, or if you're a nonprofit, foundations you have interacted with? Can you think about ways that your foundation or others have perpetuated this top-down power dynamic in your work? And just take a moment to reflect on it. It's an opportunity to pause and really think, about these unintentional ways that perhaps you're showing up that is perpetuating that dynamic. So we'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to write, and then we'll come back to our panel. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds to just wrap up your thoughts. And maybe some of you went off to look at your job descriptions and see what's written in there. Thank you. Thanks for participating in that. I'd like to bring it back to our panel. And coming back to you, Lisa, just building upon some of the stuff that you were just reflecting on. What have been some of your own realizations about these perpetuations of power, even in the context of a simple job title?
Yeah. Well, so what Shadi is referring to is my sort of taking on the title of officer in a program officer job description, which I had always just, I mean, for decades as a fundraiser, program person, you know, like the getting to the program officer was the holy grail. Like, who do you know who knows someone who knows that person? And then really in this year of sort of questioning everything, I just took a look at that name and I thought, well, why are we officers? What are we officers of? What do we associate officers with? Officers are like military, authoritarian. Like, do we think we should officiate over our grantees? There just were like all these questions for me, even in this one simple word. And we actually we don't have that position line in my foundation. So it wasn't about changing the way we do our work. I didn't do anything with this realization, except that it became sort of just like one very concrete way of, again, sort of questioning why we do the things we do. And maybe just like along those lines, Shadi, the other thing that I started doing was at the start of every meeting with a grantee or prospective grantee, I started talking about where our money had come from at the foundation. And that was really to remind myself, as well as the person who I was talking to, that this was not my money that I was there to give away. I'm not doing anyone a favor. I'm just like there doing my job, just as they're doing their job, as well as to talk about sort of the who was able to amass money when and how those fortunes accumulated, and really how little expertise they connote. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you,
Except
Lisa. Oh,
Except I did, I'll drop into a chat. There is a drawing a friend of mine did with me dressed up as an officer to illustrate this concept of how silly such a thing is. So.
Thank you. Well, on this point, because we really do want to focus on how this stuff does get perpetuated in job descriptions, I want to bring you back in, Carmen. And you alluded to this before, at Marguerite Casey Foundation, you have really reimagined the program officer job description. Even though you haven't necessarily changed the title, the job description has been dramatically reimagined. I'm going to actually find it and drop it into the link. Carmen, can you share more just about the thinking behind this, and what was the vision when you really wanted to revise this whole job description?
Yeah, I've had good and I've had horrible program officers. And it wasn't the title that made them good or bad. It was the practices of philanthropy that made them bad. It was the feeling that and I will be 1,000% transparent. I was a bad program officer. My first job in philanthropy, I was not great. It was my first time with proximity to resources. And there's a way in which I wasn't prepared or equipped to understand the complex relationship that people ascribe to you working for somebody who has a lot of money and you having a lot of money and you being smart. And so, and being able to offer opinions on all kinds of things. So I could not agree more with Lisa. Like, that early experience was deeply humbling for me, because I ended up getting fired from that job, rightfully so. And for the longest time, I'd been sitting with, went to work at other places, built an organization, had been sitting with a couple of features of the program officer that kept being repeated, and that institutions or program officers, even the best program officers themselves, worked to like bend themselves into. One is like a practice of deep surveillance that we had early in our conversation with grant recipients. When I took this job at Marguerite Casey Foundations, there was a sense that the role of the program officer was to surveil the work of organizations, and the language of surveillance was so powerful. The second was as brokers, that oftentimes program officers are the only way into an institution, right? So like the only way that I would know about somebody is because somebody, our program officer, would bring them to me. And that just seemed like, what is my job? Like, what am I supposed to be doing then? Like, how am I not supposed to be doing the work? But this idea of brokerage or brokering these relationships or brokering of power was something that was kept surfacing. The third was just sheer lack of transparency. And I know like the conversation here is around trust, but I think sometimes in philanthropic conversations, trust and transparency are disconnected. So we made a decision that is public to our current set of grant recipients that like, we are putting a calculator on our website and we're committing to paying 25% of your budget. We're reaching the tipping point for a certain number of years. It's not like you come into a meeting and then we're going to pull money from the hat and then it's going to be a random number that you get. We want you to have the most amount of money that we can give you to actually win. And so that kind of transparency, I feel like, was obfuscated by the role of program officer. So as I stepped into this role, as Jonathan Jays Green, who's our VP of Programs, stepped into this role, Rhonda Carter, our VP of Culture and Operations, we all sat down and said, okay, what are the things that we want this person to actually do? And how is that different than what is actually happening? And the biggest thing was actually raising money for grant recipients. That we see the role of program officers, not of giving the money of Marguerite Casey Foundation, that should be the given. That we see their job and the goals and their ability to do the work contingent on them being able to organize more resources, be them financial resources, be them platform resources, be them access resources, for the set of leaders that we believe are transforming our democracy and our economy, and have shifted the job to move from like investigator to creator. Like, these are all bets. The absurdity that we would think that through an evaluation report or through an application, we have insight into certain victories or certain gains for the communities is just that, it's an absurdity. And so we are really, our board was really open to it, and our staff was really open to it, to naming the fact that we are choosing people, really leaders in communities who we believe can do the job of shifting the balance of power. And we want everybody on our staff, from our operations people to our communications people, and especially our program people, to actually see themselves as servant leaders to the visions and imaginations, to the dreams and ambitions of the leaders that we support. And that was sort of the genesis of this job description. I'll say this to you, Shadi, like I said this before the call, like we didn't know how this was going to go. I mean, we got feedback from people like, oh, nobody's going to apply for this job, because you're actually asking people to do something that's radically different than what the field has traditionally asked of them. And in a week, we've had over 200 applicants for this. We have to do a webinar for this job, which is surprising to me, but for me demonstrates a real hunger from people in our field, from people in our sector, to want to do the work differently. It's like, I could not have a greater piece of evidence than the sheer interest in the job, because we're not saying you have a budget and you get to decide. We're saying the budget is fixed, you have to raise money, you have to work in service. That appetite has brought me so much hope for what's possible for our sector.
Brings me hope too. And I think the recurring theme we're hearing is partnership. And it's really cool to see the comments in the chat too, as people kind of think about and challenge, we traditionally call them grantees. Is there a different way we can even think about grantees as partners. You know, some organizations do refer to them as partners, community partners, grantee partners. So this theme of, you know, what you said, Carmen, the servant leadership, you know, and we often from a trust-based philanthropy standpoint talk about the work as partnering in a spirit of service. So it's the same kind of notion. Gabriella, I want to come next to you because you also had a very similar thought process when you came to Sewell and kind of wanted to re-examine how these power imbalances are showing up in job descriptions. Can you talk about the process you went through in reimagining job descriptions with your team?
Sure. So I think just to add on to what Carmen said, which is that staff is the greatest resource at foundations, and we often think of them as vehicles of compliance to follow spoken and unspoken rules, and that is extremely limiting. So when I joined the foundation, I came in after the founding ED, so I knew that I needed to get to know the staff that was already there, and that things had been working in a certain way for a long time, which, similar to what Dimple said, a very deep, strong culture of partnership and service. And most of our staff have worked as grant seekers. In fact, a number of our staff were former grantees of ours. So that is highly valued at the Sewell Foundation, that experience, that is a key part of the lived experience that we look for, is that ability to have real empathy. For me, what I needed to do was to get to know my staff and to get to know the organization. And I wanted to sort of see what are all the pieces. And just in getting to know each of them, I was hearing so many amazing experiences, skills, talents that they each held that weren't being brought to their work. So I asked our staff to think about what we refer to as aspirational job descriptions. And I don't recall if it was 6 or 9 months, but we basically just, as we were developing a lot of other changes, we started developing an emergent approach to our work, and really sort of thinking about how we do our work as importantly as what we're doing. So staff each came up with our own. Some people used graphics, some people used a specific template. So we didn't give a template. It was just, how would you do your job? Knowing what you know about what the communities need, what our mission and our values are, and your experience and skill sets. What came out was just so rich. So based on that, we created new job descriptions. And then the next question was, okay, and are the titles the right ones? So I'd love to share just what I asked my staff if they would share thoughts about this. And one of my staff wrote, in terms of the name, shifting from program officer title to community partner, which is what we came up with. And there are qualifiers for that. For example, we have our food systems community partner, and we have also our finance and community investment partner. So we just have adopted community partner as the root of it. The shift to the title community partner really reflects the commitment to shifting power and relationships with the communities we're supporting. The term officer holds a lot of power, hierarchy, authority, and military/prison/financial industrial complex baggage. Using the term community partner humanizes our role and describes our work in a more relational way that invites engagement and mutual support. It also really challenges us to live into what we mean to be a partner to the community, which I think has been a running theme for us. How can we be a good partner? So the title was developed by the staff. The descriptions were developed, each individual staff, and then sharing with each other, so that we came up with some sort of common pieces. And then since then, we've hired 3 new staff members, and we've actually used those aspirational job descriptions to help create the new staff roles. At the same time, we were creating a new organizational structure. So again, everything is interconnected. And so we couldn't just change the title. We couldn't just change the job description and not change the way those roles interact with each other. So we are continuing in this evolution of our structure, but our structure is moving from a very pyramid hierarchy to one that's based on pods, and every staff member leads at least one pod. One of the things that was important for us is to really eliminate the distinction that seemed to be so present in every foundation that I've worked with, but in a lot of nonprofits, this line between administrative and program staff as if somehow they were different types of humans. So we were really being deprived of the creativity, the talents, and the lived experience of our administrative staff. All of our staff lead at least one pod right now. And I cannot tell you how much more creative our work is, not just in the content, but the way it's presented. I invite you all to look up our annual report, which is on our website. It's gorgeous. I love it. I get so excited when I see some of the materials we make, because one of our staff members is an artist, and that was not a piece of them that was showing up in the work. So we are now supporting additional training on graphic recording and other types of use of the visual into our work. And it's brought personality to our work. It's brought warmth. It's allowed us to communicate in different ways that isn't as text heavy and isn't as linear, because we can communicate in different ways. And that would not have been possible if we didn't engage staff in creating the job descriptions, the job titles, and this emergent jobs organizational structure, which we are building as we go. And that causes some discomfort with not knowing exactly what's your role, because we are in this emergent space. And at the same time, the co-creation is what builds the trust. It is, I think you say this a lot, Shadi, trust is a practice. And in changing our organizational structure and the roles and job descriptions and titles, we have had to be very intentional about practicing what it means to show up in those new ways.
Thank you, Gabriella. I love that. I love that you're really kind of articulating just the aspects of culture building that allows us to kind of stay committed to these values, true to these values, just even the process of incorporating feedback and informing these job descriptions. Amazing. We're going to do a poll in a minute to just get some anonymous feedback from you all. But first, I want to go to you, Dimple, because we've had some conversations in the past challenging this notion that the ideal program officer is someone who's like a deep issue expert in the issues that they're funding in. Can you kind of comment on that and how you think about what makes a good program officer?
Yes. Before I do, I just want to say I find the last two examples that Carmen and Gabriella shared so exciting and inspiring in terms of how we can reimagine these different roles. So I just wanted to appreciate both of you. I think for a long time, the program officer role was seen as a role that went to somebody at a stage in their career when they had developed a lot of expertise on whatever the program area was, right? So if you have a foundation that is funding housing, more often than not, the beginning of that program officer position would set out the different types of expertise that you would be looking for. And there's a couple of that all have to do with substantive expertise in that area. And there's a couple of things that I've observed about that approach. So one is that it's extractive in that when we use that approach, what we're often doing is sort of taking people out of the field that we are funding in and moving them into a different context where they may or may not be able to have impact, right? But then what we're also doing is we're saying, we as a foundation, by virtue of this issue expert that we've hired, are now experts in this particular issue area. And so we end up basically solidifying a hierarchy. And the foundations when I've raised money, I used to run a donor collaborative. The hardest funders to work with were those big foundations where this was their approach. And it was hard because no matter what our strategy was for our donor collaborative, there would be months of sort of proposal rewrites with those particular program officers, right? Where that program officer would say, I see you said that your strategy is X, Y, and Z, but I think it should be A, B, and C, right? And what gave that program officer the ability to do that was that she was saying, I'm an expert. I've worked in this area. But what was being overlooked is that she no longer worked in the area on the ground, right? She was now in a foundation. And so I would say that's what I am not looking for. And I think in general, foundations need to let go of the kind of obsession around particular issues. That's not how things change, right? At the heart of inequities are these power imbalances, and power imbalances rarely or never play out in terms of just one issue. What we do need to look for is what Carmen and Gabriella talked about, which is in our institutions, in program roles and in administrative roles, we need to look for people who are good listeners, who are not looking for opportunities to build or exercise their egos. We need to look for people who are collaborative, right? Because our institutions need to collaborate, and our staff need to be able to collaborate effectively with our grant partners. We need to look for people who are resourceful and creative, and who are connectors, right? Who can, because we are in positions where we do get to sort of see the dots all over the place, right? So it's not about, I think some people in this moment where there are so many valid and accurate critiques of philanthropy, I see this impulse of just kind of taking a step back, or I see this impulse of almost being paralyzed. And I think that's a missed opportunity as well. So it's not that like there's no right role for us. There's a lot that we see by virtue of the roles that we are in, that our grant partners don't have access to, right? And so looking for people who can connect those dots and share that information, and to Carmen's job description, who really truly at the end of the day want to be of service to the fields that we fund.
Yes. So thank you, Dimple. And thank you, Gabriella, Carmen, Lisa, for all your comments on this. Let's take a poll. And NCG team, if we can get that poll up. And this is anonymous, so please answer as honestly as you possibly can. At your foundation, are job descriptions for program staff focused on supporting the foundation's desired outcomes or supporting the grantee? I think that got cut off. So it should be supporting the foundation or the grantee's needs. It seems like when I did some research before this call, the traditional job descriptions tend to prioritize the foundation's strategy. What we're talking about now is how can we shift so that this role can support the grantee's needs. And so we will give you a few more seconds to vote, and then we'll show the results. And this is totally anonymous, so no, it's not being recorded anywhere. All right, we're gonna end the poll.
Hold on, all right, never mind. They were still voting, but it's all good.
Sorry, Kate.
Okay.
We're just gonna share the results. Take a look at that. And not everyone got a chance to vote. Apologies for being trigger happy on my clicking, but well, this is probably no surprise here, right? That the majority are saying that the job descriptions are focused mostly on the foundation's desired outcomes. Good to see that there's some that are focused on both, but very few focus on grantees' needs. So this is an opportunity, right? Because we're hearing some examples of reimagining this role. So maybe it's a chance to, and if you're unsure, if you had to go scramble and go try to find your job description, maybe this is an opportunity to re-envision that, rethink that, make some edits. Thank you, thanks for participating. I am so bummed we only have half an hour because I just feel like we have so much to cover. But let's keep it moving, let's keep it moving. Lisa, I'm gonna come to you next.
I feel a lot of pressure to speak very quickly.
Okay. We do have half an hour, so don't feel like you have to talk too quickly. But Lisa, you have really, you've done a lot of writing on this topic. You've had a series in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that just wrapped up, really examining a lot of these power dynamics. And you, as a funder, as a grantee, as a partner to grantees, you've been very intentional of just like thinking about how you show up in your conversations, interactions with grantee partners. Can you talk about that? Like, what do you do? What's some practical advice for folks, even if their job description is very much focused on the foundation? How can we as funders and partners to grantees show up in a way that demonstrates a power awareness and a commitment to alleviating the power imbalance?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing about naming where the money comes from helps. I think I was telling to these guys on our planning call that my predecessors at the foundation where I work held all of our site visits at our site, which seemed very, not just like a bad way to get to know the grantees' work, but also sort of confirming whose travel time was most important. So I now try to always go, I mean, now no one ever goes anywhere, but when we go back to real life, to go to our grantee partners, you know, I was a grant seeker for many years, and I try to refer to that in our conversations, as well as, to Dimple's point, saying that I'm no longer am, and so my knowledge is perhaps dated, and also like, I just drank the Kool-Aid so quickly of being a funder. You know, my second week on the job was right after Trump was elected. And I remember calling up a colleague and being like, what if we offer a collaboration grant opportunity? And, you know, they can come together and do this. And she just stopped me. She said, Lisa, if I had given you this idea 3 weeks ago, you would have told me it was terrible. And why were funders trying to make me work with people who I didn't want to work with? So, so I think it's really important to have friends who will tell you when you're being an idiot. And I also think it's just, you know, as the questions come to us, I think to say them out loud to ourselves, to our colleagues, and to our grantees, you know, and just always be thinking about what would this be like if I was on the other side of this table, and always be just sort of naming where we sit and why we sit there, and thinking about what is it that we're really trying to do. And I think, you know, one way that I have started to articulate my role recently that I didn't before is that it is really part of my job to absorb risk as much as possible. Like, as a funder, we're just in a much better position to do that than a lot of our grantee partners. And so sometimes that's about asking folks, like, what is the message that you would like to get to the field? What can I say that you can't say? And thinking of that as part of my work also.
Thank you, Lisa. Those are really great examples of support beyond the check, which is one of the principles that we often advocate for with trust-based philanthropy. There's a question I see in here that I just noticed that was kind of a question that built upon what you were sharing, Dimple. A question of addressing this fact that sometimes it can be extractive to have an issue expert in a program officer role, you know, kind of, you know, influencing the strategy. So the question is, what about that relationship where it's a white-led nonprofit that might not have a good understanding of the communities they serve, but the program officer might have their own experience or perspective that could be instructive to the grantee. How would you respond to that?
I mean, I see those as different things, in terms of, I mean, I would say it really depends on what your foundation is trying to do. And if your foundation is trying to build power in communities of color, like in the way that's what our foundation is trying to do, then you need to be able, and who you're funding is white-led nonprofits, you need to be able to have those conversations. And your program officers need to be able to have conversations about that. I think that's different than weighing in on strategy, right? And sort of serving as a campaign manager, which is, you know, how many program officers sort of see their role. It's different than thinking of, well, here's my strategy as a program officer, and here are the different groups that are going to be implementing it.
Thank you,
That's
Dimple.
a really good question. I appreciate it.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that response. I think that's right. let's talk about the role of the CEO. We're talking a lot about the role of a program officer or program staff that hold grantee relationships. Coming back to you, Dimple, you have done some thinking on this. What is the CEO's role in being more intentional about power and potentially perpetuating power imbalance?
Yeah. So it comes, I mean, the CEO role, it comes up in different ways in philanthropy. What I would say is the part of our role that I think we have to lean into if we want to start shifting how we hold power in philanthropy is the storytelling part of our role, right? So like Carmen just demonstrated, kind of, we need to tell a new story about what our institutions are trying to do. We need to tell a new story about how change happens. We need to tell that story to our boards. We need to tell that story to our staff, right? We need to be in relationship with our grantees to make sure that that story makes sense in the context of their work. I think that for too long, the stories that CEOs have told, again, kind of like draw from corporate practices. They are stories about social change as widgets, right? This idea that there are like these little parts and we can count them and we can measure them. Social change is not widgets, right? So whereas like metrics might make sense if you are Amazon and you're trying to figure out how many boxes you've shipped, right? Like it doesn't translate in a social change, social justice context. So I would really encourage my peers to kind of like lean into that storytelling role. And then the other piece is to kind of hold awareness about the ways in which, how to put this, how we show up trickles through the organization, right? So if we are showing up in ways that, say to our program officers, how many widgets are you working with? How many, if we are saying, show us the metrics on that grant, right, then that infuses the type of relationship that the program officer can have with their grant partners. If we are saying to our board, we are going to solve homelessness in the next 2 years, right? Then it infuses kind of the type of like it sets up a dynamic where we can only then support things that can happen in the scope of 2 years. And so I don't know, I think that there's like a tone piece, there's a story piece. The last thing I'll say is 100% to something Carmen said, and we've all of us have actually offline had conversations about accountability, democratic practice, and philanthropy. My own position on this is that the structures of philanthropy are not accountable, right? So that we, I think it's very hard to say like we're doing democratic practice in philanthropy. But for CEOs, my kind of caution is that I think it's important that we not lean into the unaccountable parts of philanthropy. And there's definitely a tradition of that, right? And that I think, when Gabriella was talking about harm that can be caused in philanthropy, anyone who's ever been a grant seeker has experienced the harm of, a brilliant foundation leader who, saw everything the way that you saw it, was doing amazing work. That person's no longer in their position and like the whole field falls apart, right? So it's tempting because when you're in these roles, there is a lot of space to do what you want to do. But I think the most important thing we can do is actually build our institutions around certain practices, visions, priorities, so that it's not just about, our great ideas, but that our institutions can hold it. Because there's an enormous amount of kind of in and out in these positions, especially these days. I mean, as soon as you stopped having the ED role just be something that white men could occupy, right? There was a period where when foundation heads, like when I first started in philanthropy, foundation heads were all white men. They all wore suits, right? They didn't wear lipstick. And they all had been in their jobs for 20 years. And now you have people who look like us, like Carmen, Gabriella, myself, and like these roles turn over every 3 to 5 years, right? And so it's really important that, you know, GSF not just be what I think is a good idea, but that GSF be built out as an institution around a set of values so that grantees can count on it.
Wow, thank you.
Can I add something here?
Yes, please.
I've been like, again, I feel like I'm the newest person in this job. So I'm like in the thick of trying to figure it out. And I think the thing that is often missed in becoming the president and CEO, especially of an institution, I'll say like general service, like Marguerite Casey, where the board is deeply aligned. There isn't like wizardry or magic that you have to do to convince people, but people are very open to liberation as an objective of the institutions, like supporting leaders who are seeking freedom, who are trying to be free. And the things that most consistently come up for me, especially in this moment in this country, is that as leaders who really get to be the stewards of these resources, we have the opportunity to like quiet down the crazy making of the world that is confronting people of color in this country who are fighting for racial justice. And so this last week, I was struck by the last 7 months. I've been struck by the statements supporting Black lives across philanthropy on the one side, and the deep reticence to naming the police and actually calling for an abolition and supporting abolitionist movements as a part of the practice to actually lift up and support Black people to live free in this country. That we have the ability to do that. And many of our leaders make an active choice not to. Make an active choice just to name the problem or like the symptom, but not the sickness. So that's one thing that I've been like, I've just been doing it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I feel like it creates room for our staff and creates room for our grant recipients. On the next thing that I've been thinking about is that we just have to organize consent. Like we have to, Dimple knows that like I got this job on June 1st, and then on June 15th, I was like, okay, let's get together. Okay, sister, like now you bring your sister to this lunch, and then we're gonna have this other sister come to this lunch. And like trying to figure out how we create a new consensus in philanthropy that isn't organized around sort of individual solutions for systemic problems, but that understands that freedom is a constant struggle, that like really is committed to grappling with the issues of our democracy. Like many people in philanthropy believe that like to name these things, to like name ideological things, we are like wading into partisan territory. But I fundamentally disagree with the idea that like wanting everybody to have a house, wanting a government that provides quality education to absolutely everybody in this country for free, wanting free healthcare, like these fundamental things like Gabriella was describing earlier. I believe the government should provide all of those things, and that doesn't feel like a partisan thing. That's an ideological thing, and we have an opportunity to name those as ambitions, to like actually fund leaders who are organizing in service of that, and to step back and to say that like the people who will take calls from, like I'm consistently amazed, Shadi, at like the number of people I'm like, hey, you want to meet? And people are like, yeah, absolutely. And I forget all the time that yeah, like I run almost $1 billion institution. Who wouldn't want to meet with me? So I have to be careful, to Dimple's point, and using that power in service of these great ambitions, realizing that like individual legacy doesn't matter. Like we will die, just to bring it down a little bit, and the fight will continue. And we have an opportunity. I do believe that we have this once in a generation opportunity to really transform not only the lives of people in this country, but like what people actually believe is necessary and possible for people to live full and rich and beautiful lives in this country.
Yes, yes, totally. I love it. Love it. You know, there's so much in there. There's like the relational organizing that we must do to kind of keep this work moving forward. It's leading by example, really just, you know, making the changes, challenging the stuff that's really just been done that way just because it's been done that way. There's no real legal reason why, you know, some of these bad practices have been happening. And so, yes, it is an inspiring and exciting moment. And we only have like 13 minutes, and there's a couple things I want to address because there's some good questions coming in about board engagement and impact. So I want to come to you next, Gabriella. You know, addressing this question of how have you brought your board along and some of these changes in kind of, you know, bringing staff in to weigh in on what they want their job descriptions to look like, taking these alternative approaches to even describing it and trying different ways of thinking about it in a non-linear way. I'm sure that was not necessarily something people were, you know, ready to jump into right off the bat. So how have you brought your board along? And is it raising questions about impact and how you're kind of sharing that information back with your board?
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Carmen said. Yes to all of that. And I'll answer that question with a little bit of a follow-up to that. I think part of what was unspoken and what both Dimple and Carmen said is just that we need to reimagine leadership. There's been this invisible, unspoken idea of what a leader looks like. And it is very much around the cult of personality. It is around a very extroverted, outgoing, charismatic person that will be remembered and makes all the decisions. And frankly, wants to please the board. And so that's been the orientation. That is not who I am. That was never who I was going to be. And that was clear when the board interviewed me. So I felt good about the changes that I was proposing to the board because of the interview process and how candid I was with them about where I was coming from. So for me, it is about, it has to outlast me. So how do you create structures, processes, a culture, and really a lot of attention to culture, frankly, that will outlast me, that will outlast every staff member that's there, every board member. So what I'm going for is to create an organization that is rooted in a culture that is explicit about its values, that is very self-aware and constant learning, and also able to make mistakes and admit them. And so part of what I do is I role model that. I make mistakes a lot, and I will tell my staff when I make mistakes. And I did that very early on. And I believe that we're much more comfortable now admitting mistakes, which means that we're much more comfortable bringing crazy ideas, which often turn out to be really good ideas, or invite you to get to somewhere where the really good idea is, and you kind of have to just flow with it. I'll also say that there's often this idea that you're either linear and fact-based and factual, or you are warm and fuzzy and you care about relationships. These are not mutually exclusive. I am a lot like Mr. Spock in the way I feel, but I also love hugs and live on relationships and have, you know, my gut tells me things, you know, so you can have both. And that's what I try to embody in my leadership is I have a lot of good education and experience, and there's a lot of good research out there that I can draw on. But that does not take the place of or supersede the importance of my ability to have relationships with people. And frankly, the relationships and that culture that I'm able to set the tone for, because I do believe that the president, the CEO, the executive director, whatever the role is, has the responsibility to be courageous enough to set the tone for the culture, which means calling out when things are toxic, which means asking questions, being curious, and acknowledging your contribution, your complicit role in any of that and all of that, and to also bring that to the board. Because to your question, Shadi, it's impossible for the program officer role, for example, to change. Even if we change the title, even if we change the description, the function can't change if we're still going to our board and saying, you guys define success, and then we're going to take it out into our grantees and tell them that that's what success looks like. we're living in this split world. So we have to bring our boards along so that the board is supportive and understanding, one, that the board, I think the board structure is outdated. We need to refresh it. We need to think about what does a governance structure look like under a justice, a liberation mentality, equity framework that really supports community voice, that really supports an emergent and learning process. And that doesn't happen when the ED is not courageous and is more concerned about their own tenure, being liked, being considered smart, powerful, whatever it is that leaders are supposed to be. That is not my concern. My concern needs to be the culture of the organization and how to make sure that my board is making informed decisions. That means that I often have to tell them things that may be unpopular to hear, right? I need to correct it, misunderstandings or assumptions by saying that is not what we're hearing from our grantees. That is not what we're hearing in our community sessions. And if we are saying that we are being led by our communities, that the voice of our communities is centered, that means that the power of the board, the power of the ED, the power of all staff has to really like realign itself so that this is who we're serving. We're serving our communities. And that shifts everything. When you really look at the community as your North Star, it changes all of the structures. And that's what, for me, has to happen. I cannot operate a new culture out of an old structure. The container has to be the right shape to carry, contain, and transmit and manifest the culture and the values that we claim to have. You cannot just dress it up and call it something else, which I will say is a lot of what I've seen in philanthropy over my past 10 years and as a grant seeker. There's a lot of putting new labels on things and doing the exact same thing we always did. And it takes courageous leaders who might end up being fired from their job to create those changes.
Wow, thank you. Another follow-up question related to this. What if, that's very powerful. It's basically what you're saying is this is about a reframe. This is about using our values to drive our decision-making, helping educate and engage the board to see that. What if you still have a board member that wants metrics to prove that the community impact is happening? How do you respond to that?
I will just briefly say we've used developmental evaluation, and that's even before the Sewell Foundation. That is a much more amenable evaluation approach. We are now using emergent learning, and we're really focused on learning more than evaluation. And what we're doing is really focused on how do we learn about our approach. It's the how we're doing our work. The what has always been aligned with our mission and our values, the how, not as much. So we are looking at the how. We're changing the how. So what is the impact of those changes on our partners, on other changes? And also you need to really stretch it out to like maybe 10 years at the very least. Because if you're trying to look for changes in 2 years or even 3 to 5 years, it's just not going to happen. So I think being realistic and using the right tools. There's a lot of work on equitable evaluation, emergent learning, narrative and storytelling, looking more at qualitative learning. In the end, philanthropy exists to support the work of organizations and efforts who are the ones actually doing the work. So our success is measured by their success. And that's what we need to be looking at. And that success needs to be defined by the people doing the work.
Thank you, Gabriella. In our remaining time, I'm going to bring in each of our speakers to kind of offer one final thought. I did want to spend a little time talking about impact and evaluation because that is one of the biggest ways this top-down power dynamic gets perpetuated by philanthropy. And we've heard a lot of examples of that, you know, whether funder sets strategy, grantee has to prove that it fits into the strategy. I mean, that's kind of inherently imbalanced, and there's myriad other examples. Lisa, I want to bring you in to share a little bit about how Robert Sterling Clark Foundation approaches evaluation, because it's a flipped approach, very power-aware approach. So how are you all exploring this question?
Well, we sort of figured that the only thing we actually have any control over is how we do our work. And so the thing that we evaluate is how are we doing our job? And, you know, we're like fully bought into trust-based philanthropy. So we actually, what we do is we have an annual conversation with our grantees. We record that conversation. This is in lieu of a written report. And we have a set of questions that we send them ahead of time. So there's no surprises within this conversation. And then we have our evaluator code that and look at how we're doing against the 6 principles of trust-based philanthropy. So is she seeing evidence of trust? Is she seeing evidence of support beyond the check? All of these things. And, you know, I was just thinking, like, to the question of what if your board needs metrics? I mean, so my board can see, like, how am I doing against these? If you really want some numbers, you could look at, like, how am I rated against these 6 principles? And there are some numbers for you. But I think the question is really about, like, what is it that we have any control over? Most foundations pick randomly a set of issues and devote a set of money to it, neither of which are scientific. And so to think this much money can affect this issue is, again, just something that we're making up. So to evaluate how well that's going, you know, it's like a lot of time and effort and pain for everyone, particularly our grantee partners, to prove something really ephemeral. So we have been able to do that, and we have made some mistakes while doing it. And again, sort of we had a whole sort of chapter in our history where we asked our grantees to fill out a self-assessment about how they were doing against a set of measures. We would never look at their individual scores. It would just be for us to help know how to support them. And then they said to us, like, this is actually a really time-consuming tool, and it's not measuring something that you're affecting. You give me $50,000, that doesn't change my capacity to do this. And so we shut it down. And so, you know, we are very much a work in progress, trying to listen, trying to ask, trying to use this incredibly fortunate position that we all sit in to, like, both lean into how to create some meaningful accountability and also how to fly and find joy and support our grantees with the space we have, because a lot of the accountability is bullshit.
Thank you. We only have one more minute left. So I'd like to invite our remaining 3 speakers to offer a final piece of reflection or advice to our participants today who are in this with us and want to rethink and reimagine and repurpose this role that the traditional role. So whatever comes to mind. Dimple, I'm going to come to you first. Yeah. Any final words for our participants today?
Just that it's a really exciting time to be in philanthropy, because there is so much of this kind of questioning and this reimagining of how we can do our work. And so I would just say that, you know, be really clear on your purpose and start with that, and center, like, be really clear on what you're centering in your work. And then there's so much that you can do in terms of aligning your culture and your practices.
Thank you, Dimple. Carmen, how about you next? Just final reflections for the group.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about the context that, like, many people who lead philanthropic institutions actually are working off of a story that is animated by, like, this idea of opportunity or the American dream, or that we are all equal. Like, this story that actually sets many of our grant recipients up for failure as we actually think about contesting for power. And so I would really just encourage folks to, like, hold and read and learn not only about the history of philanthropy, which feels important but insufficient, but the history of the founding of this nation, the history of civil rights and Black liberation struggles, the history of Native struggle and Native fights for sovereignty. It's when we look only at our field and sort of dislocate ourselves from this country, I feel like our solutions are going to be wholly insufficient. So I'd encourage folks to do that work.
Thank you. Gabriella, final words for our group today.
So I would say, for an external facing piece is just listen with all of your being. Like, don't be thinking about what your response is going to be while people are speaking. Like, truly just sit there and absorb what others are saying to you. I think philanthropy often doesn't listen enough, and internally ask why. And I think something similar to what Dimple said, just what is the purpose of what you're doing? Whatever it is you're doing, what is the purpose? What is it serving? Do exercises that seem silly and repetitive, but ask yourself, if this is the value we have, what does that mean? And what does it look like? How should it show up? Actually translate these things that you hold to be dear, like your mission statement and your values, translate those into actions. What would that look like in practice? And if it's not showing up in your workplace, then you're not actually aligned with your values. And I think a lot of times we just have them up on the wall and we don't do the translating work. So listen and translate.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Gabriella, Carmen, Lisa, Dimple. Thank you for an amazing and inspiring panel. We're getting incredible comments in the chat. Thank you to NCG, SCG, Catalyst of San Diego, GEO, our amazing partners that helped make this happen and bring this about. Thank you all for being with us, sticking with us, staying over time with us. This is the final of this series, but we're putting out a survey and we want to hear from you. How do you want to keep engaging on this? My colleague Maya popped in the chat a peer exchange listserv on trust-based philanthropy. Please join that. That's where a lot of that discussion is going to continue. And stay tuned. This is not the end. This is not goodbye. But for today it is. And we'll be in touch with more. And please join me again in thanking our panelists. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone.